Hello, I wanted to talk quickly about chord symbols and the problems with them and the history of them very briefly, and why I think getting too hung up on them is a little bit of a trope and a problem of how I've been taught jazz. Let me just put it that way, but I get the feeling that other people have been taught the same way. So the most common way you're likely to come across a standard for the first time these days, or any jazz tune, is in the form of a lead sheet. And for those who don't know, a lead sheet is just when you have the melody of the song written out, possibly with lyrics if it's got them, and then above are printed these little symbols, which are known as chord symbols. And of course, the main job of a jazz guitarist these days is to take these chord symbols and turn them into something resembling an accompaniment. So the evolution of this system is quite complicated. It kind of started with the ukulele chord symbols above sheet music, which is written out with a piano arrangement and a vocal melody. And the original composer's piano part is often a very sort of sought after basis for learning a tune by people who are really into that sort of thing. Okay, so the ukulele part is usually ignored because it's just, sort of ukulele chords. That kind of stuff. Usually just a radical simplification of what's going on in the piano part. So later on you get the tune deck system, which is like a series of cards which have the same things on them, but now we've missed out the piano part. That's the genesis really of the lead sheet. A little bit later on you get fake books, which are tune decks charts printed out in the form of a book, which allow people to fake their way through a gig if they don't know lots and lots of standards. And this is in the 60s, so already we've had like most of the history of standards-based jazz. Jazz is at that point moving towards modal jazz, obviously had already happened, so it's post-modal by that point, moving towards free jazz, fusion, all sorts of things. So that's no longer kind of where the action is in jazz, if you like. That's happened by that point. And then in the 70s we have the real book, which is a vastly improved fake book written by students at Berkeley, including lots of contemporary jazz, as well as older jazz and standards. And that's a vast improvement despite having loads of mistakes in it, so the old books must have been really bad. And then now we have this thing which is iReal Beat, which is something on our phones which has just the chords and no melody. Okay? And my contention is that the chord symbols in these early things, these tune decks books, or the tune decks cards and fake books, were very, very simple. So it'd be like just basically the function of the chord. So, you might hear that it's an A7, you might be told it's an A7, but you might not be told whether or not it's got a flat 9, okay? Generally, accompaniment was simpler in those days, and obviously in the early days you had stride piano and similar styles where you had a repeated rhythmic piano part that was usually very simple harmony over which the jazz happened in the other hand, okay? Later on, Bud Powell's playing shell voicings, but he's soloing bop over the top, and then by the time you get to Bill Evans, the two things are starting to come together, and jazz harmony is more coloristic, thanks to the sort of trailblazing work of people like Ahmed Jamal and Barry Harris, who are starting to explore more complex chordal ideas, I think. So, and then obviously Bill Evans is an influence on Jim Hall, and Jim Hall is why we don't do this anymore. Really, he invented comping, pretty much, on the bridge. Comping on the guitar, that is. So that changed it, and chord symbols got more complicated. So partly because, you don't want to be playing a D9 when somebody's playing or singing, especially singing a flat 9 on that. That's going to be a problem. So as chordal accompaniments became a bit more complex and having more added notes and sort of colour in them, obviously there's more potential for clashes. Whereas if you're just playing a basic 6th or 7th chord, or even a major or minor triad, there's much less capacity for clashing. So partly out of necessity, the charts become more complex and chord symbols become more complex. And now we are at the point where obviously everybody thinks jazz is about complicated chords. So there you go. Right. So I don't think that was something that is inextricable from the history of jazz. I think it's something which is a natural result of it. But now we've got these lead sheets with melodies and complex chords and everything above them, And I think the fact that in a lot of education situations, you're passing out a lead sheet to people and saying, play this, and then they're looking at it and going like, oh, that's interesting, an A13 flat 9 chord, oh, I better play the half-whole diminished scale over that, or whatever it is. It starts to become a whole sort of like thing that the chords are the most important thing. And the chords, of course, and this is what Barry Harris says, he says, music has moved away from, or jazz music has moved away from the harmonization of melodies towards the melodization, if that's a word, of harmony, right? So, instead of having a melody, usually diatonic, like for instance Stella by Starlight, which is largely diatonic, apart from I think 2 accidentals, we are putting chromatic chords to make that sound rich and beautiful, or a jobim, or anything like that, largely diatonic melodies with interesting chords. We're now going to the point where we have chords and we're turning them into melodies. And a lot of modern jazz composition kind of falls into that category. This is like a massive thing. People talk about chord scale theory, I know I have. People talk about problems with the real book, but I think actually that's just the tip of the iceberg. The main iceberg is the fact that we learn tunes using chord symbols and lead sheets now. So of course we have real books where we have all the lead sheets, and of course we've had chord scale theory, which is a way of getting from the lead sheet into nice sounding voicings and kind of solo lines that work over the top of it and all the rest of it. But that's not how they did jazz in the 1950s and 60s. Okay, so I mean that's basically the point of what I'm saying, and I'm not trying to make a value judgment of it. Hopefully I've explained why this came about, but I think like the main thing is not to say chord symbols are rubbish and we shouldn't use them, because what are we going to use, but rather to have a healthy disrespect for them and to say, well, that might be your version of the changes and I'll play along with it now so it'll probably work, but actually the original changes are probably different, or maybe I could come up with better changes, or maybe I could reharmonize this whole thing and come up with something that accompanies the melody in its own beautiful way. Whatever it is, it's like people sort of even like some world-class jazz musicians seem to view these essentially simplifications of the harmony of the song as being like the Dead Sea Scrolls or something. It's like the Sermon on the Mount, whatever it is. It's not. These are just chord symbols. They're a distillation. I mean, Jazzduet in his video on Ronnie's Lament did an excellent job of showing how that kind of very conventional sort of now conventional kind of jazz theory and chord symbol stuff can actually butcher a song and result in versions that don't sound right. They don't have the right harmony in. That's a great video. I'll post it below. Really sums up my feelings about that, so I won't sort of elucidate it more than that. But and it's kind of things like, for instance, if I'm playing Stella by Starlight and I come to this bit, the bridge. Okay, now it's like where are these notes extensions of the chord? For instance, the sharp 5 resolving down, that resolves down as well, the 11th. Resolves again. And it resolves. So in classical terms, these are appoggiaturas, they're leaning notes, but if you see a chart for Stella by Starlight written out, you have 7 sharp 5, C minor 11th, okay, A7 sharp 11th, B flat major 9th, right? Well, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. In fact, they sound really nice. But the thing is that that's not how those notes were originally conceived of when the tune was written. It would have been appoggiaturas, okay? And one person's appoggiatura can turn into another person's extension. Another example, Chelsea Bridge, Billy Strayhorn. rich. There's rich chords there. That's definitely a minor ninth followed by a flat 13th. But these sharp 11ths seem to be like lower chromatic neighbours, but they kind of last long enough that maybe if you were soloing, you'd want to reference that sharp 11th. There's no reason why you have to. So, again, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying it's interesting how the chord symbols, like, you know, because those chord symbols will be written out like E, 7 sharp 11th, D flat 7, sorry, E flat 7 sharp 11th, D flat 7 sharp 11th, you know, which would, if you look at the chords, would encourage you to play a certain way. It's up to you whether or not you want to play that way. So what I would encourage anybody to do when looking at chord symbols is have a healthy disrespect for them. I wouldn't say treat them with contempt, but certainly don't look at them as being some kind of authoritative source on what to play. Really, you should learn the melody first, and then see how those chords relate. And then, of course, if you have, you know, if you have time before you play the tune, listen to lots of different versions of it, check out variations, have a look at a few charts, see what people have said about the harmony. If you can transcribe things from records, do that. Study the tune. You can go as deep with this as you like. You know, every tune has a history that's reflected through the musicians who have played it over the years and how they've played it. But that seems like it to me. I don't really have much more to say other than that. It's just a thing worth thinking about. I don't want to tear down everything and, you know, invent a new system of, you know, notating chords or anything like that. I just think people have to get away a little bit from the chord symbols because they get really worried about them, and the improvised lines should not necessarily observe every chord symbol. It's like if you're playing a melodic improvisation, as I've shown in some of my other videos, sometimes you can ignore the chord symbols altogether and just go with what your ear's telling you. Play a melody over the key center, you know, or introduce your own chromatic motion, introduce your own substitutes, your own invisible paths, which is, I think, very much what my channel has been about, really. Or you can use the chord scale system if you want to, because those sounds are beautiful as well. My problem with the chord scale system is never about the sounds, it's always about how it's used in pedagogy. But really my problems with the chord scale system are actually problems with the way we learn tunes, which is from lead sheets with chord symbols. It's very convenient. I might even call it a necessary evil. But it's worth remembering that it is, you know, an evil, so to speak. Anyway, thanks for watching. Post any comments below. Especially if you know anything about the history of chord symbols and lead sheets and that kind of stuff, I'd love to hear it. My scholarship is incomplete, but I'm sure there's a lot more information out there. Plus, you know, what your feelings are about it as well. You may disagree with, you know, with my ideas. I'm not sure. I'm trying not to disagree with the way, you know, chord symbols work, or, you know, and hopefully I've expressed why they came about and what the need for them is, especially the more complex chord symbols that we see in modern sort of jazz books and so on.